The first time Brenda Sterling tried to charge a 12-year-old $75 for jumping off my family dock, I almost laughed, and then I saw she was dead serious. She stood at the end of the planks with a clipboard pointed at 6 kids, like it was a badge and a weapon all at once, screaming that every single one of them needed to get out of the water immediately, as if she were the Coast Guard and not the president of a homeowners association that didn't own so much as a wet pebble of that lake. I came out of the house still holding my coffee, watched her whistle at children in mid-cannonball, and thought, all right, you have just picked the wrong family, on the wrong lake, on the wrong summer morning. My name's Elias Vance. I was 52 when this happened, and I've spent most of my life reading land the way some people read faces. I worked 30 years as a civil engineer. Roads, drainage, land use, site access, all the practical stuff that keeps the world from sliding sideways when nobody's looking. By then, I was doing part-time consulting, enough to stay sharp without letting work own me. I knew deeds, plats, easements, tax records, shoreline setbacks, all of it. What I did not expect was needing that knowledge to defend my own family's lake from the HOA president of the very subdivision my grandfather created. Harmon Lake sits up in the Adirondack foothills, about 40 minutes north of Saratoga Springs. Tucked into one of those folds of land that makes you breathe differently the second you get there, pine trees come right down to the water. Mornings smell like cold stone and wood smoke. The water is clear enough to make a grown man stop talking. At sunset, it turns the kind of copper color people try to fake in paintings and never quite get right. My grandfather Earl Vance found that lake in 1958, and, being who he was, did not gush about it, did not wax poetic, did not stand on a rock and declare destiny. He just bought it. Earl was a civil engineer too, practical, careful, the sort of man who trusted a survey stake more than a smile. He platted the subdivision in the early 60s, sold the residential lots off one by one through the 60s and 70s, and built Clearwater Pines into a real little community. About 200 homes wrapped around a beautiful piece of water. But Earl was no fool. When he drew that original 1962 plat, he sold the lots and kept the shoreline. All of it. A 40-foot strip running around Harmon Lake, high water mark to 40 feet inland. Held back as Lot 0 by the Vance Family Trust, not for conveyance. Plain language, recorded, clean, permanent. That one decision, made before I was born, ended up saving that whole community from a woman with a clipboard and a fundraising scheme. I grew up on that lake. My mother did too. So did my daughter Maya, who was 13 that summer, and thank God, had the good sense to film more than half of what happened on her phone. We had friends coming in for 4th of July weekend, 8 of my closest friends, spouses, kids, coolers, kayaks, fishing poles, the whole beautiful chaos of a summer lake house packed full of people who actually like one another. 21 people total, 6 kids under 12. And not one of us planning to spend the weekend discussing covenant enforcement with a woman in pressed linen. Then Brenda found out I hadn't bought guest permits. See, sometime during the 6 years before all this, Brenda had crowned herself Lake Warden. She moved into Clearwater Pines in her late 40s, blonde, heavyset, always dressed like she was hosting an open house luncheon nobody had asked for. She ran for HOA president in her 2nd year, because no one else wanted the job, then stayed there by doing what those people always do. Scheduling meetings when regular people couldn't attend, acting like familiarity was legitimacy, confusing repetition with law. First, it was mailbox colors, lawn height, harmless little things. Then, somewhere along the line, she decided the lake itself belonged to the HOA. Not the neighborhood experience, not the common enjoyment of it, the lake. She created what she called the Lake Access Permit Program. Residents paid $75 a year to use Harmon Lake. Guests paid $75 per visit. She built a website, used HOA dues to manage it. sent herself and the treasurer, nervous little man named Paul, down to the shoreline in a golf cart to run people off if they hadn't paid. Over 6 years, she collected more than $34,000 from a lake she did not own, a shoreline she did not control, and access she had no legal right to sell. The morning she showed up at my dock, the kids were already in the water. 2 were racing kayaks out toward the center of the lake, paddles flashing in the sun. 3 others were launching themselves off the floating platform my grandfather had built decades earlier, all knees and elbows and shrieking joy. The adults were on the porch with coffee, pretending our backs didn't hurt yet. Then I heard that electric golf cart whine coming down the access path. The sound of tiny authority arriving with full confidence. Brenda came around the bend with Paul beside her, both armed with clipboards like they were raiding a nightclub. She marched down my dock, put 2 fingers in her mouth, and whistled at the kids. Out of the water, right now, my friend Garrett stepped off the porch and asked, "I'm sorry, who exactly are you?" "I'm the HOA president," she said, which to her mind seemed to answer everything. By then, I was walking down with my coffee. I asked her to show me the rule. She pulled out this laminated, spiral-bound HOA handbook she apparently carried around like scripture and pointed to section 14.7, non-resident guests using community lake facilities required to obtain day-use permits, $75 each. I said, "Okay, and which document gives the HOA jurisdiction over the lake itself?" That stopped her for a beat. Not long, just enough. She blinked at me like I'd spoken the wrong language. Then she said, "Everyone knows the HOA manages the lake." "Sure," I said, "but which recorded document says that?" "The declaration." "The plat, a deed." "Which one?" She looked at Paul. Paul looked at his clipboard. The lake kept moving behind them like it had no interest in any of this. That was the first crack. Now here's the part that made this almost funny. I already knew deep down what I was going to find. I had read some of those old documents years before. I remembered enough to know Brenda was bluffing. But memory is not evidence. And I wasn't about to rely on instinct when a woman like that was threatening fines. Liens and whatever other suburban nonsense she thought sounded official. So I let her keep talking. She gave me 24 hours to buy guest permits for everybody on my property. 20 people, $1,500. Otherwise, she'd file a formal violation and put it before the board. I said, "That's fine. Go ahead." That threw her more than any argument would have. Then I told her I'd be pulling the deed records and original plat documentation. And if I found what I believed I would, we'd be having a very different conversation. She laughed and told me I was welcome to waste my weekend on paperwork. What she didn't know was she had already done the one thing every arrogant person eventually does. She made me stop being polite. The violation notice came certified mail on Monday morning. She'd apparently spent part of her holiday weekend drafting official letters about my guests swimming in my family's lake. $250 fine, due in 30 days. Threat of lien, if unpaid. Special board meeting Thursday on community lake integrity and resident compliance, which was a very HOA way of saying public punishment. Then she sent a mass email to all 200 households in Clearwater Pines. Didn't use my name, but made it obvious. Claimed an unnamed resident had permitted unauthorized guests to use HOA lake facilities and refused to cooperate with board authority. Called it a threat to community standards. Translation: she was building the social case before she ever had the legal one. And then, because apparently she had a gift for overplaying her hand, she had Paul put orange cones and caution tape across my dock path, with a handwritten sign that said waterfront under HOA maintenance review. My dock, my path, her cones. I took them down, folded the tape, stacked it neatly by the mailbox, and called the county clerk's office. I requested certified copies of 3 things: the original 1962 plat map, the deed chain for Lot 0, and the property tax records for Lot 0 going back as far as they had them. The clerk said the records would be ready Thursday morning. I told her I'd be there. That Thursday HOA meeting went about how you'd expect. Folding tables, performance authority. About 30 residents there. Some curious, some eager for the show. A few probably hoping I'd lose because that would mean life stayed simple. Brenda laid out her case, said I violated Section 14.7. Said I interfered with official HOA property by removing the cones, which is about the funniest sentence I've ever heard with a straight face. When my turn came, I stood up and said 3 things. I requested, in writing, a copy of the deed or recorded document granting the HOA ownership of or legal jurisdiction over the lake and shoreline. I said that until such document was produced, I would not be paying any fine related to lake access. And I suggested everybody in that room think very carefully about what they were being asked to vote on. They voted 4-1 against me anyway. The one dissenting vote came from Norbert, a retired schoolteacher who'd lived there since 1978 and still remembered when facts mattered. After the meeting, he found me in the parking lot, shook my hand, and said, "Your grandfather kept the water, didn't he?" I said, "That's what I'm confirming in the morning." He nodded like a man who already knew. Thursday morning, I drove to the county clerk's office with coffee and a yellow legal pad and opened the certified records at one of those public reference tables under fluorescent lights that make every document feel a little more important. The 1962 plat map was exactly what I thought it would be. Every lot numbered, every road named, every easement drawn in clean, careful hand. And wrapped around Harmon Lake like a collar was Lot 0, clearly marked. Retained by grantor, Vance Family Trust, not for conveyance. The deed records confirmed the full chain. My grandfather kept it. My father inherited it. I became trustee 6 years earlier when Dad passed. The tax records showed 64 straight years of property taxes paid by the Vance Family Trust. 64 years. Unbroken, documented. That was the moment the whole thing shifted from irritating to astonishing. Because once I laid the plat over current use in my head, I realized something Brenda had never bothered to learn. The HOA beach sat on Lot 0. The launch ramp sat on Lot 0. The pier sat on Lot 0. The access pads crossed Lot 0. And Brenda's own newly rebuilt private dock, composite decking, solar lights, the whole self-important package, sat squarely on land owned by my family's trust. She had been using my land to build her dock, then charging other people to use my land to reach theirs. That's not governance. That's a hustle and winning. I called Arthur Reed that afternoon, a no-nonsense real estate attorney out of Saratoga Springs. He reviewed the deed chain, tax records, plat, all of it, and the next morning he told me what I pretty much already knew. Clean title, uninterrupted ownership, no viable adverse possession claim. And one absolutely gorgeous sentence sitting in the HOA's own 1974 CC and RS, Lake. Access provided courtesy of the Vance Family Trust. Courtesy, that one word killed their whole fantasy. Because long-term use by permission is not ownership, is certainly not authority to charge fees. And it sure as hell is not authority to fine the landowner for inviting friends over. So Arthur filed a quiet title action. We sent a cease and desist. I hired a surveyor who ran orange flags along the lot boundaries so bright half the neighborhood could probably see them in their sleep. And then I made what turned out to be the smartest move of the whole thing. I didn't go after the neighbors. I went around Brenda and to them. I drafted a community license agreement for every dock owner. Simple language, the trust owns Lot 0. Existing docks can remain under permanent free license. Every resident and every guest gets free access forever. No permits, no fees, no games. People signed fast because most of them were not villains. They were just people who had been told a thing for so long they stopped wondering if it was true. Brenda, meanwhile, melted down exactly the way people like her always do once paper enters the room. She hired a lawyer who clearly hadn't read enough before speaking. She posted in the neighborhood Facebook group. She ran to the newspaper. She even called the sheriff and claimed I was blocking public access to a navigable waterway, which ended with two deputies glancing at the tax parcel number on their phones, looking at each other and basically deciding they had better things to do. Then cosplay shoreline revolution. The funniest part, the little twist that still makes me smile, was that the newspaper article she hoped would smear me ended up printing the original plat map and 64 years of tax records, which did more damage to her position than anything I could have bought with ad money. By the time the annual HOA summer meeting rolled around in August, Brenda's own attorney had quietly told her the HOA had no real claim. But by then, she had spent too much social capital, too much pride, too much bluff to back down privately. So the whole thing had to die in public. That meeting drew 112 residents, almost double the usual turnout. Hot, clear evening, water pewter-colored beyond the pavilion, insects humming in the trees. Brenda had set the front like a little tribunal. Arthur and I sat in the back with Warren the surveyor and a rolled-up large-format plat map. I also had a box. Norbert opened the door for us, asked, very calmly, which deed gave the HOA authority over the lake and shoreline. Brenda tried to answer with the handbook. Norbert said he asked for the recorded deed. Then Arthur stood up. He unrolled the 1962 plat right there on the folding table and walked the room through it in under 5 minutes. Lot 0, deed chain. Tax records, courtesy of the Vance Family Trust. Clean, factual, deadly. Then I opened the box. I had printed 112 packets, plat map summary, deed chain summary, tax history, cease and desist, and on top, the Harmon Lake Community Charter. The room went quiet, except for paper moving hand to hand. Then I told them that for 6 years, the HOA collected $34,220 in permit fees on land it did not own and had no authority to regulate. That money needed to be returned. I said I was not there to take anything away from the community. I was there to make sure nobody ever had to pay for lake access again. And then I told them the trust was putting $25,000 toward annual water quality, testing, and a junior sailing program for the kids. For one perfect second, all you could hear was the lake. Then people started clapping. And that was the end of Brenda. Really? Not the lawsuit. Not the legal notices. Not even the refund process, though that all mattered. The real end came when the whole neighborhood saw, in black and white, that the woman who'd spent 6 years acting like a warden had never actually read the documents she claimed gave her power. The board dissolved the permit program that night, 3-2-1. Brenda abstained. Refunds went out over the next 6 weeks. Every household that paid got a check. Brenda resigned the following week in a one-line email and put her house on the market 2 months later. By spring, she was gone. And the next 4th of July, my friends came back. Same dock, same platform, same lake. Kids a year older, louder, braver. We grilled on the porch, watched fireworks rise over the ridge, and not one golf cart came buzzing down the path asking for permission slips. The mergansers were back too. Mother and ducklings tracing that quiet line along the south shore, through Lot 0 like nature itself was making a point. So here's what I'll ask you. Somebody had walked onto your dock, onto your family's water, onto land your grandfather protected before you were born, and tried to charge children for swimming there. Would you have shut them down that second? Or would you have done what I did and let them talk long enough to build the case that buried them? And be honest. How many people in power do you think survive purely because nobody ever asks them the one question that matters? Show me the document. Drop your take in the comments and tell me whether you've ever seen someone mistake routine for ownership and confidence for actual authority. Subscribe to Karen's Conflict for more stories like this.